The doctor's words hung in the sterile air like a death sentence. Aggressive lymphoma, without treatment, 6 months at most. I clutched the folder containing test results, treatment options, and that devastating number, $50,000. Not covered by insurance. As I drove to my parents' home for dinner that night, hope flickered in my chest. A lifetime of being the responsible daughter, the good one, was about to matter. Family takes care of family, right? Then I watched my sister Tori twirl in the living room, flashing her engagement ring while my parents beamed. "We're spending $75,000 on the wedding," she announced. My father's hand squeezed her shoulder with pride he'd never shown me. 3 hours later, I sat in my car outside their house, my cancer diagnosis dismissed as an inconvenient intrusion on my sister's perfect day. That's when I felt it, something calcifying inside me. They'd chosen a wedding over my life. They'd always chosen her. As I wiped away tears with trembling fingers, I made a promise. I would survive long enough to attend that wedding. Not as the dutiful sister they expected, but as the harbinger of truth they never saw coming. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor seemed to buzz louder than usual as I walked out of Dr. Mitchell's office. My fingers clutched the manila folder containing my test results so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. Lymphoma. Aggressive. Specialized treatment needed immediately. $50,000 not covered by insurance. The words bounced around in my head, like a pinball machine, never landing, never settling. I sat down heavily on a bench outside the hospital, watching normal people live their normal lives. A mother pushing a stroller, a young couple holding hands, an elderly man walking his dog, none of them carrying a death sentence in a folder. I'd always been the responsible one, the planner, the one who did everything right. And now, at 29, I was facing a choice between bankrupting myself or dying. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Don't forget family dinner tonight. Your sister has big news." Family dinner. Of course. Because even cancer couldn't compete with whatever announcement Tori had planned. Growing up as Victoria Marshall's little sister had never been easy. From the moment I was born, it seemed like I was fighting for scraps of attention. Our home, in suburban Connecticut, was decorated with trophies and ribbons from Tori's dance competitions, while my academic achievements warranted nothing more than a perfunctory, "That's nice, dear," from my parents. For my 16th birthday, I received a second-hand laptop that I needed for school. 3 months later, Tori turned 18 and got a brand new BMW convertible. "She needs it for college," my father had explained when he saw my face fall. I never complained. I was Emily Marshall, the good daughter, the one who understood, who never made waves. But tonight, as I pulled into the driveway of my parents' colonial-style home, the weight of the folder in my bag seemed to give me a strange courage. Maybe now, finally, they would see me. My mother, Diane, greeted me with her usual quick hug and immediately launched into preparations for dinner. My father, Robert, barely looked up from his newspaper in the living room. Tori wasn't there yet, fashionably, late as always. "You look pale, Emily," my mother commented as I helped her set the table. "Are you sleeping enough? I told you that job of yours works you too hard." I swallowed hard. "Actually, Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad about something important. Can it wait until your sister gets here? She has wonderful news." As if summoned by her words, the front door burst open and Tori swept in, radiant in an expensive dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She was followed by Connor Williams, her boyfriend of 8 months, and the son of my father's business partner. "I'm engaged," Tori squealed, thrusting her left hand forward to display a diamond ring that probably cost more than my annual salary. The next few minutes were a blur of congratulations and champagne, with my mother crying tears of joy and my father clapping Connor on the back like he'd just won the Super Bowl. I plastered on a smile and hugged my sister, feeling the folder in my bag grow heavier by the second. Dinner was a torrent of wedding talk. June wedding, St. Thomas Church, at least 300 guests, designer dress, honeymoon in the Maldives. "We're thinking $75,000 should cover it," Tori said casually, between bites of roast chicken. "Daddy already said he'd take care of it, didn't you, Daddy?" My father nodded, beaming with pride. "Nothing but the best for my little princess." I set down my fork, the food turning to ash in my mouth. "I need to tell you all something." "Oh, Emily, can't it wait?" Tori sighed. "We're discussing my wedding." "I have cancer." The words fell into the conversation like stones into still water. For a moment, there was absolute silence around the table. "What?" my mother finally whispered. I opened my bag and pulled out the folder, placing it on the table. "Aggressive lymphoma. I need specialized treatment that costs $50,000. Insurance won't cover it. I need help." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared at the folder like it was a snake about to strike. Connor looked uncomfortable. And Tori looked annoyed. "What are you saying exactly?" my father asked, his voice oddly formal. "I'm saying I need financial help for the treatment. Without it, my chances aren't good." My parents exchanged a look that I'd seen countless times growing up, the look that meant they were having a conversation I wasn't privy to. "Emily," my mother began hesitantly, "you know we've already committed to Tori's wedding. The deposits are non-refundable, and this merger—" She stopped abruptly. "Merger?" I echoed. "Marriage," my father corrected smoothly. "This marriage is too important to our family's future." "More important than my life?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't be dramatic," Tori interjected. "There are other options. Crowdfunding or something, people do it all the time." "Your sister has a point," my father said. "You've always been resourceful, Emily." "You can't be serious," I said, looking from one face to another. "You're choosing a party over my cancer treatment?" "It's not just a party," Tori snapped, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the table. "It's my wedding, the most important day of my life. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to steal my spotlight with this cancer thing." "Tori," my mother gasped, but there was no real admonishment in her tone. "Can we discuss this later?" my father said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. "We're supposed to be celebrating." I sat there stunned as they resumed talking about flower arrangements and bridesmaids' dresses. It was as if I'd announced a minor inconvenience, not a life-threatening illness. 3 weeks later, I stood in the doorway of the guest bedroom that had been temporarily converted into a storage space for Tori's wedding items. Boxes of custom invitations, samples of table linens. And there, hanging on the closet door, was a garment bag from Bergdorf Goodman. With shaking hands, I unzipped it to reveal the most elaborate wedding gown I'd ever seen, all lace and crystals, and yards of silk. The price tag was still attached, $15,000, $15,000, enough to start my treatment. "What are you doing in here?" I turned to find my father standing in the doorway, his face hard. $15,000 for a dress she'll wear once, I said, my voice hollow. "But you can't help me pay for treatment that would save my life." "That's different," he said, crossing his arms. "How? How is it different?" "Because Tori is giving something back to this family. This wedding, this connection to the Williams family, it means something. It has value." His voice grew louder with each word. "You've always been a burden, always wanting something. At least Tori is giving something back to this family." His words hit me like physical blows. I stumbled back, bumping into the dress. "Get out," he growled, "and don't touch her things." I fled to the small bedroom I'd been staying in since my diagnosis made living alone too difficult. I collapsed onto the bed, too numb even for tears. After a while, I got up and began searching through old photo albums, desperate for some evidence that I had mattered to them once. The search led me to the attic. Among dusty Christmas decorations and forgotten furniture, I found a metal box, labeled "Never Open" in my mother's neat handwriting. The locksmith I'd dated in college had taught me a few tricks, and the simple lock gave way easily. Inside were documents that changed everything. Adoption papers for Victoria Ann Marshall, dated nearly 30 years ago. Not for me, as I had sometimes suspected in my darkest moments, but for my perfect, golden sister. According to the paperwork, my parents had been told they couldn't have biological children. They'd adopted Tori as an infant. And then, a year later, I had come along, the biological surprise baby. There was more. Financial records showing regular payments from my father to someone named Eliza Kensington, starting exactly when Tori was adopted. Quarterly payments of substantial amounts, continuing to the present day. Who was Eliza Kensington? And why had my parents hidden Tori's adoption all these years? With my head spinning, I gathered hair from my family's brushes and saliva from discarded cups. I spent the last of my savings on DNA tests, knowing I was crossing a line but too desperate to care. As I waited for the results, the symptoms I'd been trying to hide grew worse. Night sweats soaking my sheets, weight dropping off my already thin frame, bruises appearing after the slightest bump. The stairs to my third-floor walk-up had never seemed so endless. I paused on the second landing, gripping the railing as my vision swam. The weight loss that had begun with my diagnosis had accelerated, and my once-fitted clothes now hung from my frame like clothes on a scarecrow. I forced myself to climb the last flight, every step a reminder of my deteriorating condition. Inside my apartment, bills covered the kitchen table. Medical bills, rent, utilities. Red final notice stamps decorated several envelopes. The consultation with a second oncologist had confirmed my fears. Delaying treatment was reducing my chances of survival dramatically. Dr. Patterson had been kind but direct. Without the specialized immunotherapy, your chances drop from about 70% to maybe 45%, she'd said, leaning forward in her chair. "We can set up a payment plan, but we need to start soon, Emily." I'd nodded, knowing that even with a payment plan, I couldn't afford it. My health insurance covered the basic chemotherapy, but not the targeted immunotherapy that offered the best. Hope. I'd already been forced to take unpaid leave from my job as a graphic designer when the symptoms became too obvious to hide. A text message illuminated my phone screen. "Late again. Final warning. Barnes." My night job as a janitor at the Barnes & Miller law firm was the only thing keeping me afloat, even if it was draining what little energy I had left. I changed quickly, downing a handful of over-the-counter pain relievers before heading back out. The law firm was empty when I arrived, the lawyers and paralegals long gone for the day, just me and the vacuum cleaner and the endless rows of trash cans to empty. I was cleaning the senior partner's office when the room began to spin. I tried to steady myself against the desk, but missed, crashing to the floor along with a crystal paperweight that shattered on impact. I woke up in the hospital, an IV in my arm, and a nurse checking my vitals. "You're severely dehydrated and malnourished," she told me. "We've called your emergency contact." "I don't have an emergency contact," I murmured. "A Mr. Robert Marshall? He said he's your father." I closed my eyes. Perfect. My father arrived an hour later, his face a mask of irritation rather than concern. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" he demanded without preamble. "Sorry to inconvenience you with my cancer," I replied, too exhausted to filter my words. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Always the drama, always making everything about you. He ran a hand through his gray hair. The hospital called about payment. I told them you'd handle it. Of course you did. Emily, your mother and I have commitments. Tori's wedding is more important than my life. Yes, I got that message loud and clear at dinner. I turned away from him, staring at the wall. You can go now. I'm sure you have wedding cake samples to taste or something. He left without another word. The next morning, I was discharged with another bill I couldn't pay and instructions to take it easy. When I returned to my apartment, there was an eviction notice on the door. 72 hours to pay or get out. I sat on my bed, staring at nothing, when a notification pinged on my laptop. The DNA results were in. The test confirmed what the adoption papers had revealed. Tori was not biologically related to either of my parents, but there was more. Eliza Kensington, the woman receiving the mysterious payments, shared DNA markers with Tori. And strangest of all, my father showed as sharing DNA markers with Tori that suggested he could be her biological uncle. Uncle. How was that possible? I spent the next several days researching, using the public library's computers when my laptop died. Newspaper archives revealed a scandal from 30 years ago, before the internet made such things impossible to bury. Michael Marshall, my father's younger brother, had been a rising star at the family construction business. Handsome, charismatic, and apparently involved with one of his college students, Eliza Kensington. According to a small article buried in the local section, Michael had died in a car accident shortly after Eliza had announced her pregnancy. The article mentioned slick roads and brake failure on a newly constructed stretch of highway. A highway built by Marshall Construction. Court records showed my parents had entered into a complex legal agreement with Eliza. They would adopt her, baby, Tori, and provide substantial financial support in exchange for her silence about what exactly? The agreement danced around it, but the implication was clear. There were questions about Michael's death that no one wanted answered. As I processed these revelations, an ornate envelope arrived in the mail. Tori's wedding invitation. Inside was a handwritten note in her flowing script. Try not to look too sick at my wedding. I don't want you ruining the photos. The casual cruelty stole my breath more effectively than any cancer. I remembered Connor's sister, Madeline Williams. We'd been friendly at family gatherings before my diagnosis, bonding over our shared love of classic films. Unlike her brother, who seemed to live in fear of disappointing their domineering father, Madeline had a rebel streak. I found her number and sent a text. We met at a quiet cafe far from our family's usual haunts. Madeline looked shocked at my appearance but recovered quickly. Jesus, Emily, you look like I'm dying of cancer? Thanks, I know. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I heard about the diagnosis. I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Actually, yes. I leaned forward. What do you know about your brother's engagement to my sister? Madeline's expression darkened. It's not about love, if that's what you're asking. Dad is obsessed with this merger between our companies. He's convinced Connor that marrying Tori is the only way to secure it. So Connor doesn't even want to marry her? He barely knows her, Madeline replied with a shrug. But you know Connor, always desperate for Dad's approval. What's this about, Emily? I hesitated, then pushed the folder of documents across the table. I need your help to understand what's really happening. Over the next hour, I showed her everything I'd discovered. By the end, she was pale, but resolute. My father's company has access to all the financial records for the merger, she said. I work in the accounting department. I can help you find more information. With Madeline's assistance, I learned that my father's successful construction business, the one that had afforded our comfortable lifestyle, had originally been co-owned with his brother Michael. After Michael's death, my father had taken full control, and within a year, the company's value had quadrupled. The merger with Williams Development would make my father one of the wealthiest men in the state. It would also, according to Confidential, documents Madeline found, shield both companies from potential fraud investigations. The pieces were falling into place. A terrible picture of greed, betrayal, and possibly murder. But before I could decide what to do with this information, my body betrayed me again. I collapsed in my apartment bathroom, waking up in the hospital for the second time that month. Dr. Patterson stood at my bedside, her expression grave. "Emily, we can't wait any longer. The cancer is progressing rapidly. We need to start treatment immediately." "I can't afford the immunotherapy," I whispered. "We'll start with the standard protocol. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing." She squeezed my shoulder. "It might buy you some time." Time. The one thing I was running out of. As I lay in my hospital bed that night, IV tubes snaking from my arms, I scrolled through Tori's Instagram feed. Photos of her trying on veils, close-ups of her engagement ring, a video of her twirling in her outrageously expensive dress. Dream wedding, chapter perfect bride. Blessed life. I made my decision then, staring at the artificial perfection of her curated life while poison dripped into my veins to fight the cancer that was killing me. I would attend the wedding, but not as the supportive sister they expected. I would bring truth as my gift, even if it was the last thing I ever did. "Are you sure about this?" the nurse Kelly asked as she disconnected me from the monitors. "Your latest blood work isn't great. Dr. Patterson thinks you should stay for at least another round." "Can't afford it," I replied, signing the release forms against medical advice. "I'll be back when I can pay for it." Kelly pressed her lips together in disapproval but handed me a portable medication pump. "Keep this attached. It'll help manage your pain and some of the symptoms. You need to come back if you develop a fever or start bleeding." I nodded, knowing full well I might not make it back in time if things went south. The wedding was in 3 days, and I had work to do before then. The address for Eliza Kensington was in a small town called Mapleton, about 3 hours from Hartford. I borrowed Madeline's car, not trusting my own ancient Honda to make the trip. The medication pump hung at my side like an unwanted accessory. As I drove, the spring landscape blurring past my window. Mapleton turned out to be barely more than a crossroads with a post office and a diner. Eliza's house was a modest bungalow with a well-tended garden on the outskirts of town. My hands shook as I knocked on the door. The woman who answered looked to be in her early 50s, with strawberry blonde hair threaded with gray and familiar green eyes. Tori's eyes. She paled when she saw me standing there. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. "Are you Eliza Kensington?" "Who's asking?" I took a deep breath. "My name is Emily Marshall. I believe you know my father, Robert Marshall." The door nearly slammed in my face, but I wedged my foot in the gap. "Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need the truth." "There's no truth here that would help anyone," she said, but her voice wavered. I pulled out the DNA test results. "I already know that Victoria Marshall is your biological daughter. I know my father has been paying you for almost 30 years. What I don't know is why." Her eyes darted to the medical pump at my side. "Are you ill?" "Dying, actually. Lymphoma. My parents chose to fund Victoria's wedding instead of my treatment." I hadn't meant to sound so bitter, but the words came out sharp as knives. Something in her expression shifted. She opened the door wider. "You'd better come in." Eliza's living room was neat but sparsely furnished. Photos decorated the walls. Landscapes mostly, no people. She gestured for me to sit on a worn sofa. "I haven't heard that name in years," she said softly. "Victoria. I named her Elizabeth originally, after my grandmother." "Tell me about Michael," I said. Eliza flinched. "How much do you know?" "I know he was my father's brother. I know he died in a car accident after you became pregnant. I know that somehow, my father is connected to all of this." She poured herself a glass of water with shaking hands. "Michael was everything. Brilliant, kind, passionate about architecture. He taught one of my college courses. The relationship was inappropriate, I know that now, but I was 22 and thought I knew everything. What happened? When I told him I was pregnant, he was thrilled. He wanted to marry me, to leave the family business to start his own architectural firm. Her eyes grew distant with memory. But Robert was furious. The business was already in trouble. Michael was the creative genius, the one with the vision. Robert was just the money man. They argued? Violently. The night before Michael died, they had a terrible fight at the office. Michael threatened to expose some questionable business practices if Robert tried to prevent him from leaving the company. He said he had documents, proof of something illegal. She swallowed hard. The next day, Michael's car went off the road, on that new highway section, the one Marshall Construction had just finished. And you think my father had something to do with it? Eliza's eyes met mine. I know he did. There were no skid marks, Emily, no indication Michael tried to brake, and the accident happened on a clear, dry day. My stomach clenched. You think he tampered with the brakes? She nodded slowly. After the funeral, Robert came to see me, offered to adopt the baby, to provide financially for both of us, if I kept quiet about my suspicions. I was young, pregnant, terrified. I took the deal. Her voice broke. I've been living with that decision ever since. Do you have any proof? Anything beyond suspicions? Eliza stood and walked to a small desk in the corner. From a hidden compartment, she withdrew a key. I've kept everything. Letters from Michael, photos, documentation of Robert's payments. And this. She handed me a small cassette tape. Michael called me right after the fight with Robert. Left this on my answering machine. I've kept it all these years in a storage unit in Hartford. She pressed the key into my palm. Unit 247 at Secure Storage on Maple Street. Everything's there. Maybe it's time the truth came out. I left Eliza's house with the key and a renewed sense of purpose, despite my failing body. The storage unit contained exactly what she'd promised, boxes of evidence meticulously preserved for 30 years. Most damning was the recorded phone conversation, Michael's voice tense as he described the fight with my father, and then a second recording. My father, hours after Michael's death, his voice thick with panic. No one can ever know what happened. Eliza, no one. The wedding rehearsal dinner was held at an upscale restaurant in downtown Hartford. I arrived late, my medication pump partially concealed beneath a loose cardigan. Conversation stuttered to a halt as I entered, my gaunt appearance, impossible to ignore. My mother rushed over, her smile brittle. Emily, darling, you made it. We were so worried. Were you? I asked flatly. Her eyes darted to where the pump was visible. You should really dress better to hide that thing tomorrow, she whispered, steering me toward the table. People will ask questions. Tori's eyes narrowed when she saw me. She was radiant in a designer dress, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, her makeup flawless. She hugged me for the benefit of the watching guests. You came, she said loudly. I'm so glad you're feeling up to it. Then, her lips close to my ear, she whispered, Don't you dare make this about you. Throughout dinner, I sat silently, watching the tableau unfold. My father, jovial and expansive, raising toast after toast to the union of the Marshall and Williams families. Connor, handsome but subdued, his smile never reaching his eyes. His father, Gregory Williams, calculating and cold, watching the proceedings like a hawk. After dessert, I found myself alone with Connor on the restaurant's terrace. He looked surprised when I approached. Emily, he said awkwardly. I'm sorry about your health situation. Are you in love with my sister, Connor? The question clearly startled him. He glanced around to make sure we were alone before answering. Does it matter? It might. He ran a hand through his hair. I barely know her, if I'm being honest. This is all my father's idea. The merger, the marriage, all of it. Securing the family legacy, he calls it. What if I told you the wedding might not happen? Hope flashed across his face before he could suppress it. What do you mean? Just, don't be surprised if things don't go as planned tomorrow. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. I arrived at the church early, joining the bridal party in a side room where hair and makeup stations had been set up. My mother had arranged for me to go last, perhaps hoping the makeup artist could perform miracles. Jesus, the makeup artist murmured when it was finally my turn. What am I supposed to do with this? Just do your best, I said tiredly. It doesn't really matter. Despite her best efforts, no amount of makeup could disguise the hollow cheeks, the dark circles, the sickly pallor of my skin. Tori, resplendent in a silk robe while waiting for her grand dress reveal, glanced at me and frowned. Can you sit over there? She asked, pointing to a chair in the corner. You're bringing down the mood. While the other bridesmaids fussed over Tori, I slipped out to meet briefly with Eliza, who had arrived as planned and was waiting in a coffee shop across from the church. Are you sure about this? She asked, her hands fidgeting with her cup. Once it's done, there's no going back. I'm sure, I replied, handing her copies of all the evidence. If anything happens to me, I need to know someone else has this information. You look terrible, Emily. You should be in a hospital. I smiled grimly. After today, I probably will be. Back at the church, the ceremony proceeded with all the pomp. $75,000 could buy. Flowers cascaded from every surface. A string quartet played as the guests, Hartford's elite, filed in. I stood at the altar with the other bridesmaids, swaying slightly as my strength ebbed, watching Tori glide down the aisle on my father's arm. During the vows, I caught Madeline's eye in the front row. She gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Everything was in place. After the ceremony, the photographer arranged us for family photos on the church steps. Can you try to look healthier? He asked me, lowering his voice. Maybe remove that thing? He gestured to my medication pump. It's keeping me alive, I replied. My father stepped close. Just take it off for a few minutes, he hissed. This is your sister's day. No. After several tense moments, they took a series of photos without me, the final visual representation of my lifetime of exclusion from the family narrative. The reception was held at the Hartford Club, an exclusive venue with crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed place settings. The bridal party was announced with elaborate fanfare as we entered. When my name was called, I walked in slowly, my medical tubes and pump clearly visible in my bridesmaid's dress. Murmurs rippled through the crowd of 300 guests. My mother intercepted me before I could reach my seat. What are you doing? She demanded in a harsh whisper. Why are you trying to ruin this day? I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. The woman who had chosen her husband's ambition and her adopted daughter's wedding over her biological child's life. I'm not trying to ruin anything, I said quietly. I'm just finally seeing things clearly. As I took my seat, my father approached the microphone for his speech. He spoke eloquently about family loyalty, about the pride he felt in Tori, the daughter who has always brought joy to our lives. He expounded on the bright future ahead as the Marshall and Williams families united, never once mentioning my existence, let alone my illness. Throughout the reception, I watched the expensive champagne flow, listened to toast after toast celebrating the perfect couple. When the microphone passed near me, my mother quickly redirected it. Across the table, I saw Tori mouth "thank God" to her maid of honor. Madeline caught my eye from across the room and nodded. She had placed key documents under specific guest seats: Connor's father, the family lawyer, several business associates. She'd also confirmed that Eliza was waiting just outside, ready to enter when called. I stood steadying myself on the table. My vision swam, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse before I could speak. My heart raced, my breaths coming in short gasps. This wasn't just nerves. My body was failing me at the crucial moment. Tori noticed my distress and, instead of showing concern, loudly suggested, "Emily, maybe you should step outside if you're not feeling well enough to celebrate properly." Several guests turned to stare, shocked by her callousness. The room tilted dangerously, and I gripped the table harder. "Not now. Please, not now." Through the haze of my fading consciousness, I heard the DJ announce, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the traditional money dance. Line up for your chance to dance with our beautiful bride and bring prosperity to the newlyweds." The irony gave me the final push I needed, as guests began to form a line, cash in hand, to pin to Tori's dress. I forced myself upright. With every ounce of strength remaining in my failing body, I made my way toward the DJ booth. The music was about to change for the money dance when I reached the microphone. My medical tubes and pump were prominently visible, a stark contrast to the celebration around me. I took the microphone from its stand, my hands steadier than they had any right to be. "Before we continue celebrating this union," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent hall, "there are some truths this family needs to hear." The room froze as I stood with the microphone in my hand. My father's face contorted with rage as he rose from his seat, while my mother's eyes widened in horror. Tori stood paralyzed near the dance floor, her expensive dress glittering under the reception hall lights. Connor looked bewildered, and his father's expression darkened as he sensed something was about to disrupt his carefully orchestrated celebration. "3 months ago," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. "I was diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma. I came to my family for help with the $50,000 treatment that could save my life. They refused because they had already committed $75,000 to this wedding." Gasps echoed through the hall. A woman at a nearby table covered her mouth in shock. Gregory Williams, Connor's father, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "For those of you who have known our family for years, you've seen the pattern. You've watched Tori receive everything while I stood in the shadows. What you didn't know, what none of us knew until recently, was why." My father started moving toward me, but Madeline smoothly intercepted him, pretending to ask him a question while blocking his path. I silently thanked her and continued, "I've spent my life wondering why I was never enough for them, why nothing I accomplished mattered. Now I know the truth extends far beyond simple favoritism." I paused, gathering strength for what came next. "Tori isn't their biological daughter, she's adopted." "That's a lie," Tori screamed, dropping her bouquet. "Mom, Dad, tell everyone she's lying." My mother tried to rush toward me, but her path was blocked by guests who had risen from their seats, riveted by the unfolding drama. "But that's not all," I continued. "Tori is actually the daughter of my father's brother, Michael, and his student, Eliza Kensington." On cue, Madeline escorted Eliza into the reception hall. She walked slowly to the front, her resemblance to Tori unmistakable now that everyone could see them side by side. The similarity in their eyes, the shape of their faces, the set of their jaws, it was undeniable. Murmurs rose from the older guests who had known Michael. "What the hell is this?" Gregory Williams demanded, standing up. "Robert, what's going on?" My father had gone pale, his eyes darting between Eliza and the exit. "This is absurd. Emily is clearly delusional from her illness and medications." "Am I?" I reached into my clutch and held up a flash drive. "On this drive is evidence that my Uncle Michael didn't die in an accident. After threatening to expose illegal business practices, his car mysteriously crashed on a stretch of road where Dad had been doing construction." I nodded to Madeline, who began distributing printed copies of the evidence to key guests. The recorded phone calls are particularly interesting, especially the one where my father sounds panicked after Michael's accident, saying, and I quote, "No one can ever know what happened. The room had gone completely silent. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, trays suspended mid-service. "And Connor," I said, turning to my sister's new husband, who stood frozen near Tori. "I'm sorry to tell you this way, but you and Tori are biological cousins through Michael's lineage." I held up the DNA test results. "This marriage is legally invalid in this state. But I suspect that's the least of our concerns now." Connor's face drained of color. His father snatched the DNA results from my hand, scanning them with increasing alarm. "The real reason for this rushed wedding isn't love. It's money," I said, watching my father's face contort with fury. "Dad's company is bankrupt." I nodded to Madeline, who handed Connor's father a folder of financial documents. "He needs this merger to avoid financial collapse and possible criminal charges for fraud." Gregory Williams flipped through the documents, his expression hardening with each page. "You son of a bitch," he muttered to my father. "You were going to drag us down with you." With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and played the recording of my parents from the previous night, their callous words about me echoing through the silent hall. "Once this wedding is over and the merger is complete, we won't have to deal with her neediness anymore. We've given enough." My mother's voice, clear and unmistakable. "She's always been difficult, even as a baby." Then I played the damning recording from Eliza's storage unit, my father's panicked voice after Michael's death. Multiple guests stood up and began to leave, including business associates and friends who had known my parents for decades. "I don't expect to live much longer without the treatment they refused to help me get," I said, my strength finally fading. But I couldn't let this family continue building their lives on lies while I was erased from existence. The truth needed witnesses. The room blurred around me as my knees buckled. The microphone slipped from my fingers, clattering on the floor with a screech of feedback. The last thing I heard was Tori's anguished scream and my father shouting something about damage control. Then darkness claimed me, and I surrendered to it willingly. I had done what I came to do. Chaos erupted as I collapsed. Through my fading consciousness, I heard shouting, crying, the scrape of chairs as guests fled the scandal. Someone, a doctor among the guests perhaps, was checking my pulse. Voices argued about whether to call an ambulance or just let my parents handle it. "Get away from her," came Madeline's fierce voice. "Her parents are the last people who should be making decisions about her care." Then Connor's voice, surprisingly authoritative. "I'm calling 911. No one touch her until paramedics arrive." The sound of Tori's sobbing penetrated my haze. "It can't be true. It can't be. Mom. Dad. Tell me it's not true." My father's desperate attempt at damage control. "Everyone please remain calm. My daughter is clearly unwell and confused. These allegations are—" "Save it, Robert," Gregory Williams interrupted. "I've seen enough. This wedding is over, and so is our business relationship." The wail of approaching sirens was the last thing I heard before consciousness fully slipped away. Dreams and memories mingled as I floated in darkness. My childhood birthday when no one remembered. Tori's sweet 16 with its professional photographer and 100 guests. The day I graduated college with honors, my parents leaving early to attend Tori's dance recital. The doctor's face as he delivered my diagnosis. My father's cold eyes as he called me a burden. Light slowly penetrated my closed eyelids, and the steady beep of hospital monitors pulled me back to reality. I blinked, disoriented, trying to make sense of my surroundings. A private room, flowers on the windowsill, sunshine streaming through partially closed blinds. "She's awake," said a voice to my right. I turned my head slowly to see Connor sitting beside my bed, with Madeline standing next to him. Their presence made no sense. "What?" My voice was a dry croak. Madeline poured water from a pitcher and helped me take a sip. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. The doctors weren't sure you'd wake up." "The wedding?" I managed. Connor gave a short, humorless laugh. "Completely destroyed. along with about 5 generations of family planning. You certainly know how to throw a grenade into a room. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of guilt. I'm sorry it had to happen that way. Don't be, he said firmly. You saved me from marrying my cousin, for one thing. What happened after I collapsed? Madeline and Connor exchanged glances. Total chaos, Madeline said. After the ambulance took you away, everything fell apart. Gregory, our father, was livid. He's pressing fraud charges against your father for the merger deception. Your evidence about Michael's death was pretty compelling, Connor added. The police have opened an investigation based on Eliza's testimony and the recordings. I tried to process this information. My parents? Your mother tried to visit yesterday, Madeline said carefully. The hospital turned her away at our request. At your request? Why would you? Because we're your medical proxies now, Connor explained. You had no directives in place, and we convinced the hospital that your parents had a conflict of interest regarding your care. I stared at them, confused. Why would you help me? I ruined your wedding, exposed your family's business dealings. You did us a favor, Madeline said firmly. Connor never wanted to marry Tori, and I've been trying to escape our father's control for years. This whole mess actually freed us in a way. Connor nodded in agreement. Plus, the strangest thing happened after you were taken away. People were so moved by your story that someone started a crowdfunding campaign for your treatment. What? I tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through my body. Don't move too much, Madeline cautioned, adjusting my pillows. But yes, it's true. Former family friends, business associates, even strangers who heard about what happened, they've all contributed. The campaign has raised over $150,000. 3 times what I needed, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. The specialized treatment has already started, Connor said, gesturing to the IV stand beside my bed. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. I lay back, overwhelmed. What about Tori and my parents? Tori had a complete breakdown after learning the truth, Madeline replied. Once the DNA evidence was verified, she moved in with Eliza. Apparently, she's desperate to learn about her biological father. Her wedding dress was donated to a charity for cancer patients' weddings, Connor added with a slight smile. And the business? I asked. The merger collapsed, obviously, Connor said. Your father's company has filed for bankruptcy. During the investigation, they discovered that your college fund, which you were told didn't exist, had been emptied years ago to cover company debts. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. When I'd asked about college savings in high school, my parents had claimed they hadn't been able to set anything aside. Meanwhile, Tori's education at an expensive private university had been fully funded. The road ahead is still difficult, Madeline cautioned, squeezing my hand. But you have a fighting chance now. And you're not alone. I looked at these 2 people, practically strangers until a few days ago, who had stepped up when my own family had failed me. Thank you, I whispered, the words wholly inadequate for what I felt. 3 weeks into my treatment, my mother appeared at the hospital despite the restrictions. I was alone in my room when she entered, her normally perfect appearance showing signs of strain, hair less precisely styled, makeup not quite hiding the shadows under her eyes. Emily, she said, placing a bouquet of lilies on the table. My least favorite flowers. She didn't even know that about me. I don't want to see you, I said flatly. Please, just hear me out. She sat in the visitor's chair without waiting for permission. What happened at the wedding? It wasn't what you think. Really? Because I think you and Dad chose Tori over me my entire life, including when it came to life-saving medical treatment. She flinched. We made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But you have to understand the position we were in. After Michael died? After Dad killed him, you mean? Her face went white. I didn't know. Not at first. By the time I suspected, we were already raising Tori. already committed to the lie. It seemed kinder to protect her from the truth. Kinder to her, maybe, but what about me? What was your excuse for treating me like I didn't matter? You were always so independent, so capable. Tori needed more support, more attention. We thought you were fine. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I've left your father, filed for divorce. I want a chance to make things right. I studied her face, searching for genuine remorse but finding only fear and self-preservation. I think you should leave. Emily, please. No. Maybe someday I'll be ready to hear your excuses, but not today. Not when I'm fighting for my life because you chose not to help me. After she left, a nurse brought in a letter she'd left at the desk. I set it aside unopened, not ready for whatever justifications it contained. As spring turned to summer, my condition gradually improved. The specialized immunotherapy, combined with traditional treatments, was working better than the doctors had expected. My prognosis had shifted from dire to cautiously optimistic. My hospital room had become a kind of headquarters for my unlikely new support system. Eliza visited regularly, always bringing homemade soup and stories about Michael, his dreams of designing sustainable buildings, his love of classic jazz, his habit of leaving love notes in her textbooks. Through her, I began to know the uncle I'd never met, the one family member who might have treated me differently. Connor and Madeline were constant presences, handling paperwork, arguing with insurance companies, and ensuring I received the best care possible. Connor had broken ties with his father after learning the extent of his involvement in the fraudulent merger plans. He was using his business degree to help restructure what remained of the Williams Company after his father's forced resignation. Any news about my father's case? I asked Connor one afternoon as he helped me walk the hospital corridor, my strength slowly returning. He's negotiating a plea deal, Connor replied, trading testimony against some former business partners for a reduced sentence. Looks like he'll serve about 10 years. I nodded, processing this information. I felt no satisfaction in my father's downfall, only a hollow sadness for what might have been if he'd made different choices. Your mother's divorce filing went through, Madeline added, looking up from her laptop. She's claiming she was also a victim of his manipulation. Was she? I wondered aloud. The recordings suggest she knew more than she admitted, Connor said, gently. But maybe not everything. I thought of her letter, still unopened in my bedside drawer. Some truths I wasn't ready to face yet. Tori had made no attempt to contact me. According to Eliza, she was struggling to reconstruct her identity after learning the truth about her origins. She'd moved into Eliza's guest room, canceled her honeymoon, and started therapy. She asks about you, Eliza told me during one visit. She's not ready to see you yet, but she asks how you're doing. What do you tell her? The truth. That you're fighting. That you might win. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I was discharged from the hospital. The cancer wasn't gone, but it had retreated enough that I could continue treatment as an outpatient. My apartment had long since been rented to someone else, so I moved into Madeline's spare room temporarily. My first week of freedom coincided with a preliminary hearing in my father's case. I decided to attend, needing to see him face the consequences of his actions. The courthouse was crowded with reporters. The scandal had attracted considerable attention in business circles. My father looked smaller somehow in his dark suit, his shoulders hunched as he conferred with his attorney. When he spotted me in the gallery, his expression flickered between shame and defiance. I held his gaze steadily until he looked away. After the hearing, as I was leaving the courthouse, a reporter thrust a microphone toward me. Ms. Marshall, how does it feel to know your revelation saved your life but destroyed your family? My family was already destroyed, I replied quietly. The truth just made it visible. That evening, I finally opened my mother's letter. Inside was a confession. She had suspected my father's involvement in Michael's death, but had chosen to look the other way to protect her lifestyle and social position. She'd convinced herself that adopting Tori was an act of kindness rather than a cover-up. Over time, their preference for Tori had become a habit, neither questioned, even as they saw the pain it caused me. The letter ended with a plea for forgiveness I wasn't ready to give, and a check for $25,000, half of what you needed for treatment. Too little, too late, but I deposited it anyway. The money would go to the foundation I was planning to start. 1 year after the fateful wedding day, I stood at a podium in the ballroom of a different hotel, addressing the inaugural fundraiser for the Marshall Truth Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping cancer patients denied family support. The crowd before me included many faces I recognized from the wedding. Former family friends, business associates, and community members who had witnessed my collapse and subsequent vindication. But front and center were the people who mattered most now: Eliza, Connor, and Madeline, my chosen family. When I was diagnosed with lymphoma, I began, I discovered that disease can take many forms. Cancer attacks the body, but secrets and lies destroy the soul. In seeking treatment for one, I was forced to confront the other. I scanned the audience, noting the absence of my parents and Tori. Some people ask if I regret what happened that day, if exposing the truth was worth the cost. My answer is yes, because living honestly, even with pain, is better than surviving on lies. As I continued my speech, I felt a strange lightness. The cancer was in remission, though my doctors warned it could return. The legal proceedings against my father were ongoing. My relationship with my mother consisted of occasional stilted phone calls. Tori and I remained estranged, yet something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by my family's rejection. I had claimed my own story. After the fundraiser, which exceeded its goal by nearly $100,000, we celebrated at Madeline's apartment. As we raised our glasses in a toast, I noticed Eliza watching me with a bittersweet smile. "What?" I asked. "You remind me of him. Of Michael," she said softly. "He had that same determination, that refusal to accept injustice. He would have been proud of you." "We're proud of you," Connor added, raising his glass higher. Later that evening, as the others chatted in the living room, I stepped onto the balcony for some air. The city lights spread before me, and I thought about the journey of the past year, from diagnosis to near death to unexpected rebirth. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I opened it with mild curiosity, then froze at the words on the screen. "It's Tori. I'm ready to talk if you are." I stared at the message for a long time, weighing the possibilities. A reconciliation? Another confrontation? Or something in between? A cautious exploration of who we might be to each other now that the myths of our childhood had been shattered. I typed a response. "Coffee tomorrow? Just the two of us." Her reply came quickly. "Thank you." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and rejoined my friends inside. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight was for celebrating survival, not just of cancer, but of the harder disease of living someone else's version of my life. The next morning, I had an appointment to have my medical port removed, the device that had delivered both poison and healing into my body over the past year. Its removal would mark the official end of my treatment, though monitoring would continue indefinitely. As the doctor prepared for the minor procedure, he remarked, "This is always my favorite part of cancer care, when we get to take out the hardware." "Mine too," I agreed, smiling as I thought of the coffee meeting scheduled for later that day. The port's removal was more than a medical milestone. It symbolized the removal of other unwanted attachments, the toxic family dynamics, the lies, the relegation to the shadows. The procedure took less than 30 minutes. As I left the hospital for possibly the last time as a patient, I touched the small bandage where the port had been. The physical scar would fade with time, as I hoped the emotional ones might. Whatever happened with Tori, whatever the future held, I was finally the author of my own story. No longer a secondary character in my family's narrative, but the protagonist of my own life. Complicated, flawed, but authentically mine. That realization, more than the remission, more than the foundation's success, felt like the true healing. And as I stepped into the sunshine, I knew it was just the beginning. What would you do if your family chose someone else's happiness over your survival? Sometimes the strongest act of self-love is standing in your truth, even when it shatters everything around you. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe for more tales of family secrets, justice, and the courage to reclaim your own life.